I am vengeance. I am retribution. Fear me, heretic, for I am your death.
A dreadnought is a cybernetic combat walker of intermediate size used by the chapters of the Adeptus Astartes as heavy infantry support for their space marine companies. The most common form of dreadnought deployed in the 41st millennium is officially designated a Castraferrum pattern dreadnought. Even the superhuman space marines are still mortal and can fall in battle despite legends to the contrary amongst the common people of the Imperium of Man. Dreadnoughts are war incarnate, towering machines that advance forwards with thunderous strides, fiery death roaring from the myriad of heavy weapons mounted on their hulls. They are terrifying foes, fighting with all the skill and ferocity of a space marine, but combined with the durability and firepower of a battle tank. Dreadnoughts are often mistaken by mortal observers for huge suits of battle armor or robots. They are similar to both and yet neither. Dreadnoughts are a combination of armored walker and cybernetic life support system. Their pilots are neurally linked straight into the dreadnought's cybernetic systems and are able to use the walker as if it were their own body, although they are permanently entombed within its ceramite skin until they are destroyed. When the greatest of the Astartes are crippled in combat, the Battle Brother's body will be repaired and transferred into an armored cyberganic sarcophagus outfitted with extensive life support systems. This sarcophagus is then interred within the heart of the armored torso of a dreadnought if there is even a spark of life left. The pilot himself survives only as a tightly curled and shriveled organic component deep inside the dreadnought, which is at once his reborn body and his tomb. Sustained and kept alive within the sarcophagus, the link between his physical being and the dreadnought's systems is absolute, and for the remainder of his life. The space marine within the sarcophagus will control the robotic body of the walker and experience the outside world through a web of cyberganic neural links and sensors implanted within his life support systems. The sepulchre that contains a chapter's dreadnoughts is a holy shrine, and the tech marines tend to their charges with great care, fastidiously applying sacred oils and unguents while chanting the litanies of preservation. To honor these courageous warriors, the fallen heroes are allowed to sleep away the Terran centuries until need calls them to war once more. The space marines encased within dreadnoughts are often thousands of Terran years old. As a result of their great age, many dreadnoughts, known as Venerable Dreadnoughts, are not only approached by their battle brothers for support in combat, but also as advisors in the governance of their chapter. The oldest dreadnought in the Imperium, Bjorn the Fell-Handed of the Space Wolves, was a member of the Primarch Leman Russ's retinue and fought in the Horus Heresy when he was still whole of body, making him well over 10,000 standard Terran years old. When the dreadnoughts are not in use by their chapter, they are placed back into the chapter's chapel in its fortress monastery to sleep away the centuries in a form of suspended animation until they are needed once more. As they sleep, the sepulchres in the armory that houses dreadnoughts are regarded as sacred shrines by the dreadnought's battle brothers, and tech marines delicately anoint them with sacred balms and oils on a daily basis. Dreadnoughts are highly revered by their brothers for their wisdom and strength, and some space marines attend them to pay their respects even while they sleep. Dreadnoughts have their roots far back in the dark age of technology, and have endured in idiosyncratic forms both on Mars and with the techno-barbaric warlords of Terra, as well as scattered human realms throughout the Age of Strife. Some of these individual relics were still in service during the Great Crusade and early years of the Horus Heresy, although many times retenanted over the millennia. Brought together under the banner of the Imperium, many patterns of dreadnoughts existed, and it was in latter-day conjunction with the superhuman physiology of the Space Marines that this technology had reached its zenith. By the 41st millennium, the art of their construction has long since been lost, the arcane knowledge required passing into ritualized mythology, and each chapter's dreadnoughts are treasured relics. They are a living embodiment of the machine god, representing the ultimate fusion of the biological and the mechanical, as each one contains a living, sentient being. The pilots encased in the shell of a dreadnought often have memories stretching back for millennia, and these ancient warriors are a tangible link to their chapter's past and heritage. In the 41st millennium, there exist few examples of dreadnought patterns beyond the Castraferrum pattern, with the more advanced Contemptor pattern, dreadnoughts being an extremely rare sight. Other patterns, such as the Deredeo pattern, Dreadnought, and Leviathan pattern, Siege Dreadnought, are even rarer, with very few examples known to still exist, only to be unleashed from a chapter's armory during the times of greatest desperation. The Castraferrum pattern. Dreadnought is the most common pattern of dreadnought used by the Adeptus Astartes in the 41st millennium. The following section details all known information on the Castraferrum Dreadnought. The majority of dreadnoughts in use by the Space Marines conform to the pattern known as the Castraferrum, of which the Mars Castraferrum pattern Mark IV and Mark V are the most common. In appearance, the Castraferrum is very different from other types of dreadnought, very few of which exist outside of the stasis-sealed reliquary chambers of the Adeptus Astartes. It is not as tall as such venerated relics as the Contemptor pattern Dreadnought, and its armor is said to be configured far more to the fore than the unhallowed Lucifer pattern Dreadnought. Some claim that the older unification classes of proto-dreadnoughts, dating back to the time of the Unification Wars, could be piloted by non-Astartes warriors, but the Castraferrum can only be fully controlled by a Space Marine, thanks to his unique physiology and mental conditioning. Ancient and incomplete archival fragments suggest that the Castraferrum pattern was introduced in order to meet a range of tactical challenges. It is configured for direct assaults, the ironclad dreadnought being the ultimate expression of this tactical role. It also excels in zone mortalis missions, such as starship boarding actions, tunnel fights, and combat deep inside densely built hive cities. Here, its lower profile allows the Castraferrum to negotiate low-ceilinged passageways that the taller Contemptor pattern would be unable to pass along. The true reason, however, that the Castraferrum remains in common use, while the Contemptor and other patterns are rarely seen, relics lies with the technology utilized within its many systems. Instead of the ill-understood adamantic arc reactors and helical targeting arrays of the Contemptor pattern, the Castraferrum uses an adaptable thermic reactor and other such technological systems already found within a wide range of current Adeptus Astartes war machines. During the Horus Heresy, many of the existing Mark IV Castraferrum dreadnoughts turned traitor. As a result, in the 41st millennium, the Imperium has noted that the majority of Chaos dreadnoughts are Mark the Semps. This has led many within the imperial hierarchy to suspect that the machine spirit of the Mark IV Castraferrum is flawed. As a result, most chapters of the Adeptus Astartes now prefer to make use for the more advanced Mark IV Castraferrum chassis when possible. Those Mark IV Castraferrum dreadnoughts still serving within loyalist chapters are protected by anti-demonic wards and purity seals in the hopes that this will reinforce them against the temptations of chaos. The standard Castraferrum pattern. Mark IV, or Mark V Dreadnought, carries a heavy-ranged weapon on its right arm, and the left arm is equipped with a Dreadnought close combat weapon. The latter is usually a Dreadnought Power Fist or Power Claw, with either a Stormbolter or Heavy Flamer fitted below the forearm, or in the case of the Mark IV fitted to the side of its main chassis. Though the Dreadnought's Power Fist shares the same name, it is not at all similar to the melee weapons also called Power Fists used by other armed forces of the Imperium. Unrestricted by size or weight, Dreadnought Power Fists are vastly more powerful than ones carried by Imperial infantrymen, even Space Marine Terminators. The Dreadnought's Power Fist is, like the unwieldy infantry-borne Power Fist and Chain Fist, strikingly effective against heavy armor. This, combined with the Dreadnought's own impressive unmodified strength, makes the fist deadly to all, even heavily armored foes like a Space Marine Chapter Master. Also, the Dreadnought's heavy vehicle armor means that even those that survive the initial assault can do little more than wait for the inevitable. The ranged weapons used by standard Castraferrum Dreadnoughts include assault cannons, multi-meltas, twin-linked lascannons, twin-linked autocannons, twin-linked heavy bolters, twin-linked heavy flamers, missile launchers, or a plasma cannon. Castraferrum Dreadnoughts are also able to be outfitted with extra armor plating, a searchlight and smoke launchers. Dark Angels Battle. Demi-Company, the Battle Demi-Company formation of the Dark Angels chapter used before the introduction of Primaris Marines, consists of 1 company master or chaplain, up to 1 command squad, up to 1 company veteran squad, 3 tactical squads, 1 assault squad, 1 devastator squad, and up to 1 dreadnought. Composed of grim, resolute, and utterly determined warriors, the battle demi-companies of the Dark Angels are the obsidian hard foundations around which the chapter's strike forces are built. Even a single Dark Angel's battle brother is a force to be reckoned with, his discipline, fortitude, and ability a match for dozens of lesser men. A squad of these monastic master combatants is more terrifying still. When gathered into whole battle demi-companies, the Dark Angels are the equal of any foe in the galaxy. Rigorously drilled, bound together by unbreakable ties of rhetoric and brotherhood, these warriors operate upon the battlefield like a single, lethally efficient machine. Objectives are held with stoic determination, the enemy breaking like waves against the indomitable cliffs of the Dark Angels' ranks. The Castraferrum pattern Dreadnought can be equipped with a wide variety of weapons and equipment other than its standard loadouts. Many times these loadouts have their own designation and are intended for different battlefield roles. All known variants of the Castraferrum pattern Dreadnought are as follows. The Assault Dreadnought replaces the standard Dreadnought's ranged weapon with another Dreadnought close combat weapon. These Dreadnought variants are an uncommon sight within many Space Marine chapters due to the fact that removing the Dreadnought's ranged weapon arm means it forfeits its ability to engage ranged targets. This, when combined with the Dreadnought's relatively low ground speed, means the Dreadnought will be very vulnerable to enemy ranged fire. These types of Dreadnoughts are used by Space Marine chapters that favor drop pod assaults, such as the Blood Ravens chapter, dropping the Dreadnought directly into the enemy's position where they can do the most damage. The term Assault Dreadnought is not a common name. Instead, most Assault Dreadnoughts have no special designation. The Hellfire Dreadnought replaces the standard Dreadnought's Dreadnought close combat weapon with a missile launcher, trading its close combat ability for long-range, anti-vehicle firepower. The advantage of the Dreadnought's missile launcher over its Space Marine equivalent is that it is capable of moving at full speed whilst still laying down a barrage of missiles. Hellfire Dreadnoughts are usually referred to as Fire Support Dreadnoughts, or in many cases are given no special designation. The Hellfire Dreadnought's missile launcher carries up to 8 crack missiles that are capable of causing severe damage to enemy vehicles, and unlike the missile launchers carried by Space Marine infantry, the Dreadnought is fully capable of firing accurately whilst moving. The Hellfire Dreadnought is capable of replacing the twin-linked autocannon with most Dreadnought ranged weapons, such as a set of twin-linked lascannons. A sub-variant of the Hellfire Dreadnought, known as the Firewind Dreadnought, is armed with a set of twin-linked heavy bolters. The Siege Dreadnought is designed exclusively for assaults against fortified positions. Some Space Marine chapters have equipped their armored Dreadnought battle brothers to siege fortresses and lead their assaults upon other fortified enemy emplacements. They are equipped with either an Inferno cannon or a Flamestorm cannon for clearing out enemy infantry from bunkers and an assault drill arm for grinding through ferrocrete in only a matter of seconds. This arm also usually includes a built-in heavy flamer, so that once a hole has been drilled, the Dreadnought can pour superheated promethium into a bunker or pillbox complex. Siege Dreadnoughts are specialized units and are only deployed when a chapter needs to break through a stubborn static defense line or during close-quarters street-to-street fighting within a city or town. A Siege Dreadnought's standard weapons loadout includes an Inferno cannon, an assault drill with built-in heavy flamer, smoke launchers, a searchlight, and reinforced ceramide armor. In some cases, the Inferno cannon can be replaced with a multi-melta, and 2 hunter-killer missile launchers can be attached using external sponsons to the Dreadnought's carapace. The Ironclad Dreadnought is a standard Castraferrum pattern Dreadnought that has been optimized specifically for close combat. It possesses reinforced ceramide plating on the front of its shell and can be equipped with multiple different weapons intended to aid in melee combat. Ironclad Dreadnoughts are usually armed with a Dreadnought close combat weapon with an underslung Stormbolter, Heavy Flamer, or Meltagun, and a Seismic Hammer. These Dreadnoughts can also be armed with a Hurricane Bolter, or a Dreadnought Chainfist, which is nothing less than a Dreadnought-sized Chainfist. They can also be equipped with up to 2 hunter-killer missile launchers, and the specialized Ironclad Assault Launcher that fires different types of grenades. These Dreadnoughts are used by many Astartes chapters for close combat situations and during sieges, although it is not as effective as the Siege Dreadnought. The Mortis Dreadnought is a variant of the standard Imperial Dreadnought, and is most commonly found in the armories of the Dark Angels chapter and their Unforgiven successor chapters. The Mortis pattern differs from all other Dreadnought variants, except for the Hellfire Dreadnought, that makes use of 2 long-range weapon arms. These Dreadnoughts make use of 2 sets of long-range weapons that are always the same. These weapons include sets of twin-linked Lascannons, twin-linked autocannons, twin-linked heavy bolters, or 2 missile launchers. The Mortis Dreadnought is capable of laying down a tremendous amount of firepower upon a target, and since the Dreadnought's body is such a stable firing platform, it can continue moving while firing accurately. Older Dreadnoughts are referred to by Space Marine chapters as Venerable Dreadnoughts, or more simply as their Ancients. Having earned many millennia worth of combat experience, Venerable Dreadnoughts are even harder to destroy than their younger counterparts. However, as a trade-off for their knowledge, they are armed with older, more volatile, and usually less effective weaponry. Venerable Dreadnoughts often are a drain on their chapter's resources, for their millennia-old pilot becomes harder and harder to rouse with the passing of time, and their even more ancient chassis are prone to malfunction, with the parts needed to update them no longer available. A sizable portion of a Master of the Forge's attentions is spent caring for his chapter's ancients, with the ever-lurking risk of the Venerable Dreadnought simply not waking again. Yet no chapter would ever consider granting the Emperor's peace to its ancients, for they are the wardens of a chapter's history and traditions, for only they can still remember firsthand what now only resides in the moldering tomes of the chapter's librarium. Some of these ancient behemoths no longer resemble the current mass production Mars pattern Mark V Dreadnoughts and are bulky and cumbersome. Others stand towering over their foes, like elegantly crafted statues ready to smite their enemies. It is now nearly impossible for most chapters of the Adeptus Astartes to construct new Dreadnought chassis from scratch, as the technology and know-how is no longer available to the Imperium. This is made obvious by the existence of such chapters as the Iron Hands, who lost the majority of their Dreadnoughts early in the Horus Heresy at the drop site massacre on Istvan Fi. Now the chapter maintains relatively few Dreadnoughts relative to other Astartes formations, since they were unable to replace these losses. As such, Venerable Dreadnoughts are a scarce resource for their chapters, since any damage they suffer must be replaced by using stockpiles of ancient parts or cannibalizing already extant Dreadnought chassis of a similar pattern and make. One of the more notable examples of a Venerable Dreadnought is the Space Wolves Bjorn the Fell-Handed. He is the oldest Dreadnought currently in service in the Imperium and was once a member of the Primarch Leman Russ's personal retinue. He fought in the Horus Heresy and served as the Space Wolves' first Great Wolf when he was still whole of body. The most esteemed member of the Space Wolves, Bjorn is the only being the current Great Wolf will listen to, and if necessary defer to, and is reverently woken once in each standard century. At that time, all the Space Wolves present, from the Great Wolf to the youngest Bloodclaw, raptly and silently gather around the Ancient to hear him speak of their Primarch Leman Russ and keep the Space Wolves' ancient oral tradition alive. Oddly, the Space Wolves' Venerable Dreadnought, released by Games Workshop, is similar in design to the standard Mark V Dreadnought, save for the Space Wolves tokens and possessing a metal blister instead of plastic, while the generic Venerable Dreadnought is an ornately decorated war machine. The Contemptor pattern Dreadnought is an ancient Imperial cybernetic combat walker used by the Space Marines in the days of the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, 10,000 Terran years before the present day. Like the current patterns of Dreadnoughts now in service, the Contemptor pattern Dreadnought served as a cybernetic sarcophagus for an Astartes who had been so badly wounded in battle that his only chance for continued service to the Emperor lay in being interred within the cybernetic sarcophagus of a Dreadnought. The Contemptor pattern Dreadnought, like much of the technology developed at the dawn of the Imperium of Man, is larger and more powerful than its standard pattern counterparts and was once a key part of the earliest Space Marine Legion forces raised on Terra in the 31st millennium to initiate the Great Crusade. Such relics are sometimes recovered as archaeotech by the Imperium in the 41st millennium and then used to supplement the forces of the present-day Space Marine chapters. The Contemptor pattern Dreadnought was once a staple of the armored might of the Space Marine legions first raised on Terra following the end of the Unification Wars. Evidence of their ancient origins exist in the forms of sacred chapter Memento Mori and other ancient Imperial monuments raised on worlds such as Necromunda and Loren Alpha. This suggests that the Contemptor pattern Dreadnought played an integral part in the earliest Astartes forces raised on Terra for the Great Crusade. A more powerful combat walker than the current patterns of Dreadnought in service with the Adeptus Astartes, the Contemptor pattern Dreadnought featured many technological systems that found a parallel in the combat robots of the ancient Legio Cybernetica, including such fabled techno-arcana as adamantic field generator technology that would later be refined and incorporated into the storm shields used by Space Marine Terminators and other now-lost secrets from the dark age of technology that were meshed with the Contemptor's basic systems. During the height of the Great Crusade, the Contemptor served alongside the standard Mars pattern Mark IV and Mark V Dreadnoughts as a spearhead unit for the Legiones Astartes. During the Horus Heresy and the wars that followed in its wake, like the Great Scouring, they bore the brunt of the fighting by Dreadnoughts in every theater, and as a result, suffered the heaviest losses. Like so many of the Imperium's most advanced and sophisticated war-fighting technologies, the ability to manufacture and maintain the Contemptor Dreadnought was essentially lost in the chaotic aftermath of the heresy. The few of these relics that remain in service in the 41st millennium are incredibly rare pieces of archaeotech even in comparison to their fellow Dreadnoughts. But when they take to the field, it is as a living reminder of the golden age of the Imperium, when the Emperor still walked amongst mankind, and the foes of humanity tremble at the sight of its ancient glory. The standard Contemptor pattern Dreadnought is outfitted with a twin-linked heavy bolter attached to one arm and a massive Dreadnought close combat weapon on the other with a built-in storm bolter. Smoke launchers complete the standard weapon's loadout. A Contemptor's standard weapons complement can be replaced with a number of different weapons to suit different tactical needs, including a multi-melta, a twin-linked heavy flamer, a twin-linked autocannon, a plasma cannon, a Cares pattern assault cannon, a twin-linked lascannon, a power-leeching heavy conversion beamer, and a chain fist with a built-in storm bolter. A Contemptor can replace its built-in storm bolter with a heavy flamer, a compact Dreadnought-sized plasma blaster, or an ancient graviton gun. It can be outfitted with extra ceramite armor plating, a searchlight, a carapace-mounted cyclone missile launcher, and an advanced targeting augury cogitator system to increase the accuracy of its ranged weapons arrays. All Contemptor Dreadnoughts are protected by advanced adamantic shielding, which generates a protective gravitic shield around the walker using an advanced adamantic power core, and which provides greater protection from both ranged and melee attacks for the walker. However, when damaged, the adamantic power generator can overload and result in a devastating miniature atomic explosion which can badly damage nearby allied units. Some rare examples of Contemptor pattern dreadnoughts have been known to carry strange and singular weapons that find their origins in the dark age of technology, such as the Cares pattern assault cannon, which is considered by some imperial savants of the techno-arcane to be the forerunner of the Terminator's assault cannon, compact plasma blasters capable of being fitted to the carapace of a dreadnought and gravity flux weapons, like the Graviton gun, whose secrets were ultimately lost during the Civil War between the sects of the Adeptus Mechanicus, known as the Schism of Mars, at the outset of the Horus Heresy. The Redemptor Dreadnought is a new pattern of Adeptus Astartes. Dreadnought specifically created to serve alongside the Primaris Space Marines. It, like the standard pattern Castraferrum Dreadnought, is intended to provide mortally wounded Primaris Marines with another chance to continue to serve the Emperor. Taller, broader, and more cunningly wrought than the dreadnoughts of traditional design, these Goliaths of battle are powered by hyperdense reactors and sophisticated fiber bundles. They can accelerate from a thudding stomp to a thunderous, loping gait that shakes the ground, barreling through hails of fire in glorious defiance. One jointed arm of the Redemptor is given over either to a devastating heavy onslaught Gatling cannon, a rotary weapon that can chew through a band of heretic Astartes in a single pass, or a macroplasma incinerator, a gun that harnesses the heat of captive suns to melt enemy tanks to bubbling sludge. The other arm ends in an articulated dreadnought power fist of advanced design. With this pistoned gauntlet, the Redemptor can tear even bio-beasts and demon engines apart at close quarters. Such is the miraculous design of the Redemptor's neural links that its inhabitant, despite being entombed in a box-like cybernetic sarcophagus within the Dreadnought's chest, can exercise control with surprising dexterity and speed. It is whispered that the advanced systems of the Redemptor are a curse as well as a blessing. Many of those Redemptors that have fought for a sustained period have already had their sarcophagi replaced, their original pilots burned out by the intensity of the machine's destructive prowess. The Brutalis Dreadnought is a variant of the Redemptor Dreadnought that has been specialized through its weapon loadout for melee combat. The Brutalis Dreadnought is a purebred assault weapon designed for maximum shock and carnage. Like all Primaris Marine Dreadnoughts, its high performance comes at the expense of the mortally wounded Astartes pilot within its cybernetic sarcophagus, whose damaged form is slowly burned out by the strain of operating such an awesomely powerful combat walker. Those who endure such exertions still find their minds drifting away from their former selves, though in the eyes of their chapter, it is a small price to pay for their martial might. They fight with a pair of terrifying Brutalis talons, which can rip enemy tanks and infantry asunder or even tear the legs from a Chaos Knight. However, the Brutalis Dreadnought can also be outfitted with Brutalis fists, which hit with the force of a thunderbolt and come with built-in, wrist-mounted, twin-linked bolt rifles for added anti-infantry firepower. The Dreadnought's twin-linked Icarus Iron Hail heavy stubber teaches enemy aircraft not to seek safety in the skies and ensures that it is not an easy target for the foe's air power. Chassis-mounted heavy bolters allow a Brutalis Dreadnought to unleash respectable amounts of anti-infantry firepower. If a chapter needs its Brutalis Dreadnoughts to face enemy armor, a pair of multi-meltas in place of the heavy bolters will cook any vehicles that the Brutalis does not crush with its fists or rip apart with its claws. The Ballistus Dreadnought is a variant of the standard Redemptor Dreadnought that serves the Adeptus Astartes as a fearsome ranged weapons platform armed with a versatile ballistus missile launcher capable of unleashing frag and crack missiles and a devastating twin-linked lascannon, the perfect counter to heavily armored enemy monsters and tanks. The Ballistus Dreadnought was of particular use in Adeptus Astartes combats with Xenos foes that tended to attack in large swarms or masses, such as the Tyranids and the Orks. The Dreadnought's missile weapons and lascannon were also highly effective at taking down heavily armored but extremely powerful single targets such as the larger Tyrannid bioforms and Ork-armored vehicles like battle wagons. Created in limited numbers in the latter days of the Great Crusade, the Leviathan-patterned Siege Dreadnought was developed in secret on Terra, away from the pervasive oculars of the Mechanicum. Its massive frame incorporates hybridized technologies, some dating back into the dim past of humanity. Towering over later Imperial Walker patterns, this heavily armored dreadnought is savagely powerful. It was designed for siege warfare and primarily armed with close combat and support weaponry that can rend buildings, vehicles, and flesh alike. Though it is no less effective when armed with the powerful and esoteric short-ranged weaponry uniquely developed for it. The Leviathan's oversized adamantic arc reactor allows it to bear weapons more powerful than other classes of dreadnought, and also powers reinforced energy fields that surpass those developed for the Contemptor class. Power has its cost, though, and the systems of the Leviathan place a lethal level of strain on the minds its occupants. Those few examples of relic Leviathan siege dreadnoughts that survive in the armories of Space Marine chapters into the 41st millennium are reserved for the direst of circumstances. Astartes who find themselves interred within a Leviathan will pay a heavy toll, either with their life or their reason. The Telemon Heavy Dreadnought was a massive dreadnought variant that was used during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy by the Emperor of Mankind's personal bodyguard, the Legio Custodes. The Telemon pattern heavy dreadnought towers over even a Contemptor pattern dreadnought, with a bulk comparable to that of the Leviathan pattern, but in an artificer-wrought hull. The Telemon heavy dreadnought bears a striking resemblance to the Aquilon Terminator armor worn by the elites of the Custodes. Fewer than a handful of Telemon dreadnoughts were to be found within the ranks of the Legio Custodes, each intended to stand sentinel over its charges no matter the force brought against it. In part, this rarity was due to the cost in labor and resources for the creation of such a superlative engine of war, for each bore at least one plate worked by the Emperor's own hand, and also the rarity of appropriate candidates to control them. The honor of interment in one of the few existing Telemon sarcophagi was awarded only to the most celebrated warriors within the sodalities of the Legio Custodes, and until a worthy candidate found his end in battle, the dreadnought stood silent and empty. Despite this, the sheer power of an unleashed Telemon class, Dreadnought far outweighed the trials of its construction, for few could stand against the array of esoteric, handcrafted weapons that graced its chassis or the ferocious will and warrior skill of the master custodian interred within. Castraferrum. Infernus Dreadnoughts are dreadnoughts that belong to the various Traitor Legion and Renegade Space Marine chapters. They are very similar to their Loyalist Castraferrum pattern counterparts, but have not undergone the mutational process to become Helbrutes. Like their Loyalist counterparts, the body of a mortally wounded but feared heretic Astartes of a Renegade or Traitor Legion warband is placed within a cybernetic sarcophagus that contains multiple life support technologies. This sarcophagus is then placed within the armored form of a combat walker that the sarcophagus's inhabitant can control using neural impulses. However, most Chaos Space Marines, unlike their Loyalist counterparts, do not see this fate as an honor, but as a destiny to be avoided at all costs. This is because being trapped within the armored shell of a dreadnought, while suffused with the power of chaos, drives the Chaos Space Marine insane and transforms the resulting Ferrum Infernus Dreadnought into an unstoppable and incredibly bloodthirsty killing machine. As a result, far from being revered for their wisdom or experience like their Imperial counterparts, all Chaos Dreadnoughts are shackled securely when not in combat because the crippled Chaos Space Marine within has been driven insane by millennia of being trapped within the cold cybernetic sarcophagus as the power of chaos warped his mind and spirit. They are used as insane behemoths to trample the enemy and are regarded with caution, as the madman within the dreadnought can turn his wrath upon his comrades if there are no enemy units within range. It is exactly this unreliability that led Abaddon the Despoiler to call for the creation of the Defiler as a replacement for the Traitor Legion's Dreadnoughts. Chaos Dreadnoughts' weapons are configured in the same way as Imperial Dreadnoughts of the same pattern and variant, but have no specific designations. As they are not wise or even reliable by any standard, Chaos Dreadnoughts are usually designated as fire support or frontal close combat assault units, rather than elite warriors like their loyalist Space Marine counterparts. Chaos Dreadnoughts could also once be configured into more powerful versions of their Imperial counterparts by the use of special marks dedicated to one of the Chaos Gods, imbuing them with unholy sorceress powers. This practice is now rarely seen amongst the warbands of heretic Astartes that serve the Dark Gods. Chaos Dreadnoughts are armed similarly to their loyalist counterparts with potent ranged and close combat weapons. These include Dreadnought close combat weapons such as claws or energy-infused whips and flails, or twin-linked autocannons, lascannons, and heavy bolters. Chaos Dreadnoughts are also sometimes outfitted with a multi-melta or a plasma cannon to provide enhanced armor-piercing abilities, a Chaos. Dreadnoughts' close combat weapons often have a built-in bolter or heavy flamer, and one or both arms can be replaced with a missile launcher to provide added ranged fire support. Chaos Dreadnoughts often prove erratic or unstable in combat, and as a result, few Chaos Space Marine warbands will make use of them unless there is little other choice and will prefer to unleash other, more reliable demon engines upon their foes. A Sonic Dreadnought is a variant of the Chaos Dreadnought. The Sonic Dreadnought is used almost exclusively by the Emperor's Children Traitor Legion and their many fragmented warbands. The Sonic Dreadnought differs from other Chaos Dreadnoughts in its main armament and various other upgrades. The Sonic Dreadnought is armed with sonic weaponry, usually a set of twin-linked sonic blasters or a blastmaster, along with a Dreadnought Chainfist. This variant of Chaos Dreadnought is also usually equipped with Dirge Casters and a Doom Siren. During combat, the Sonic Dreadnought moves across the battlefield, continuously broadcasting discordant howling and screams of ecstasy and madness, rupturing their enemy's sanity or even worse, taking their lives, another glorious experience for the Chaos Dreadnought's pilot in the name of Slaanesh, the Dark Prince of Pleasure. A Helbrute is a variant of Chaos Dreadnought that is a twisted mockery of the Space Marine Dreadnought he used to be, combining the firepower of a small main battle tank with the mind of a frenzied psychopath. Each Helbrute holds a living Astartes within its plated metal chest, a Chaos Space Marine driven over the edge of madness by the never-ending cycle of battle that defines the Long War. A Helbrute is piloted by a warrior who, like his loyalist Dreadnought counterparts, has suffered extreme bodily damage in combat. The critically injured Astartes is then bound into an amniotic sarcophagus at the walker's heart, connected by cybernetic nervous system implants and a mind impulse unit to the controls of the war machine. However, while loyalist Space Marines of the Adeptus Astartes consider it an honor to serve their chapter for eternity as a Dreadnought, Chaos Space Marines consider such a fate to be little more than a living death, a torturous, mocking punishment from the ruinous powers. They abhor the thought of such a miserable half-life locked away in a dank and imprisoning cybernetic womb, where they can no longer drink in the sights of battle with their own eyes or feel the kick of a bolter in the own hands. For Chaos Space Marines, it would be better to die and find final release in the maelstrom of the warp than to spend eternity locked in a hard, adamantium shell. As a result, most Helbrutes are completely psychotic, even before the warp melds the metal of their hated prison with the flesh within. A creeping insanity mingled with desperation and fury eats away at them over the long passage of the millennia. Between battles, the sarcophagus containing the Helbrute's pilot is disconnected and dragged clear of its armored shell to lie inert and seething in the darkness. The Helbrute is chained like a beast when it is not actually fighting, for fear that some residue of the pilot's soul may send it into a berserk rampage. As the ships of a Chaos Warfleet approach their prey, the Helbrute's heavy weapons are prepared and loaded. Its power scourges and hammer-like fists are daubed with fresh blood, and its sarcophagus is installed, and the madness of the Chaos Space Marine within burns ever fiercer as he rises from the depths of his dormancy. Once the Warfleet's warriors have landed at their target, the Helbrute is unleashed, a lunatic beast of flesh and metal intent upon venting its rage on everything in its path, friend and foe alike. In the aftermath of the galaxy-wide conflict known as the Horus Heresy and the subsequent Great Scouring, the traitor legions were pursued by the vengeful Imperium and cast into disorder and retreat. They were eventually driven into the shadow of the greatest warp storm in the galaxy, known as the Eye of Terror. During their flight from their persecutors, the traitors lost much of their cherished and sacred war gear, or it became corrupted and scavenged. Much of the more advanced techno-arcana was cast aside in favor of arms more readily manufactured and maintained by the hellspat forges of the Dark Mechanicum. But even during these dark times for the servants of the ruinous powers, the rare few Chaos Contemptor pattern dreadnoughts were always held as a most precious resource by those Chaos Space Marine warbands fortunate enough to possess them. The nightmarish intellects of the warsmiths of the traitor legions fashioned demonic replacements for those technological systems of the Contemptor dreadnoughts that they no longer possessed the skills or the material to replicate. Unable to maintain the Contemptor's original arcane armaments in exile, the Dark Magos replaced them with occult weapons of diabolical design, forged in blood and suffused by demonic force, such as the Soul Burner, which unleashes explosive blasts of demonic force that devours the souls of its victims, and the Butcher Cannon, a heavy-caliber rotary gun whose shells are bound with demonic runes of anathema and bloodletting to increase their penetrating power and murderous toll. Another notable piece of forbidden chaos technology incorporated within a Chaos Contemptor is the replacement of its standard adamantic power generator with a warp-infused hellfire reactor that charges its armored carapace to provide a preternatural resilience and also serves as a hungry vortex for the soul stuff of those it has killed. Enemy psychers are particularly vulnerable to its relentless hunger. The cost for this boon, however, is the loss of the advanced adamantic shielding used by the original Contemptor pattern dreadnought. Though few in number, these ancient relics have changed hands over the millennia many times and carried out countless dark deeds in their wake. Chaos Contemptor dreadnought chassis have always been preserved for the interment of powerful Chaos Lords, Dark Magos heretics, and sometimes even worse. As a result of their exalted nature and favor with the Dark Gods, the occupants of these dreadnoughts have avoided the inevitable madness that normally consumes other Chaos dreadnoughts. These walkers fuse together the power of mankind's lost technological might with the diabolic forces of the warp to create killing machines that are more than a match for any fielded by the forces of the Corpse Emperor. He first encountered during the Battle of Ithrica amidst the catastrophe on Calth during the opening years of the Horus Heresy, the twisted form of the Mhara Tainted Dreadnought was terrifying in both its aspect and its unearthly power. The first Mhara is believed to have been created from the barely living remains of a Gal Vorbak Dark Brethren and a battle-shattered Contemptor Dreadnought chassis, both recovered from the blood-soaked ground of Istvan V. Fused together by unholy practices, they were then corrupted by a warp-born power, giving birth to a new monstrosity, a living engine of war and hatred. The Word-Bearer's Mhara Tainted Dreadnought is a fearsome opponent in battle. Wielding a warp-fire plasma cannon and tainted power claw, it is formidable both at range and in close combat, its blows slicing through armor and energy fields alike. Its warp-twisted reactor and the demonic powers gifted to it by dark forces make it all the more deadly, even breaking the bonds of reality around the Mhara to allow it to walk through obstacles as if they were not there at all. The Osiron pattern Contemptor Dreadnought was a variant of the Contemptor pattern Dreadnought that was used by the Thousand Sons Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. For many solar decades, The arts by which the power of an Astartes Psyker could be maintained medically within the armored sarcophagus of a dreadnought eluded the Thousand Sons and any other Space Marine Legion that tried, with the occupant experiencing a lingering death, madness, or malign psychic phenomena. The Osiron pattern dreadnought came about as the result of Magnus the Red himself applying his brilliant mind to solve the problem, resulting in the creation of a device known as the Osiron. This device takes the form of a crown of psychometric barrier lattice encasing the occupant's living brain. The Osiron device was difficult to construct and was barely understood by even the most learned Psi-Arcanists, though this did not stop the Thousand Sons from outfitting it to their Contemptor pattern dreadnoughts with startlingly powerful results. Imperial records indicate that Magnus the Red, before the Council of Nicaea, gave the schematics of the Osiron device to all of the other Space Marine legions, though it is most likely that most spurned this gift entirely. It is unknown if the Osiron pattern dreadnought is still used by the Thousand Sons, or if any other Astartes legions or their descendants made use of the Osiron. The Orks also have noticed the usefulness of dreadnoughts in battle, particularly their shooty and stompy aspects. Orkish dreadnoughts, or Death Dreads as they are called, are a crude parody of their imperial namesake. Ork dreads are armed with massive numbers of claws and guns. Due to the fact that Ork mechs have less understanding of technology than the Adeptus Mechanicus, most Orkish dreads are simply robotic-controlled war machines with an array of buttons and levers to be used by the Gretchen pilot rather than the pilot being cybernetically interfaced with the machine. Smaller variants of Ork dreads, named Kilakans, also exist. These cousins of the Death Dreads are often fielded in squadrons of 3 and are just as devastating in combat as their larger cousins, except they have less armor. This is due to the nature of the Kilakan's pilot who, being merely a Gretchen, still retains a healthy fear of being shot at. The Craftworld Aeldari also use large robotic walkers in combat called Wraithlords that are their equivalent of Space Marine Dreadnoughts. A Wraithlord contains no living warrior. Rather, it is merely a robotic shell, a repository for the animating soul of a dead Eldar hero. Wraithlords are graceful but mighty giants that dwarf their Wraithguard cousins. These massive constructs are extremely precious to their Eldar craftworlds and have a supernatural toughness due to being made from the psychically active substance called Wraithbone. Summoned into being by the necromantic processes and sorcery of the Eldar Spirit Seers, only a true hero of the Elder race has psychic power enough to animate the gigantic Wraithbone shell of a Wraithlord. An Eldar soul is drawn from the infinity circuit of a craft world and resides within the Wraithbone construct until such time as its power begins to fade and it can no longer function, or it is destroyed. The Eldar Wraithlords stand significantly taller than a man, carry an array of weaponry, and are a terrifying sight on the battlefield. Wraithlords have incredible strength in any case, but also sometimes carry a Wraith Sword for close combat. If the animating soul within the Wraithlord specialized in close infantry assault when it was alive, it will seek to tear apart its enemies with great energized fists, or cleave several apart with a swing from its massive sword, known as a Wraithblade. If the animating Eldar soul specialized in combat support during life, the ghostly warrior's energy core will instead be rerouted to power a devastating array of heavy weaponry such as a shuriken cannon. Either way, a single Wraithlord can turn the tide of battle for the Eldar, the legends of the fallen heroes within the construct continuing to grow even after death. As with Space Marine power armor, there are different marks, iterative versions, of dreadnoughts. The most common version is the Mark V, a design that has been used since the introduction of the second edition of Warhammer 40,000 in 1993. Made of plastic, this is a generic model which can be used by any Space Marine chapter. The right arm can either be armed with an assault cannon or twin-linked Lascannon, while the left side can either be a power fist, with either a Stormbolter or Heavy Flamer underneath, or missile launcher, allowing the player to build either a standard or fire support, Hellfire Dreadnought. Chapter-specific dreadnoughts, such as the Blood Angels Furioso and the Dark Angels Mortis, also exist. These use the standard Mark V design. There are also metal models for Venerable Dreadnoughts. The generic Venerable Dreadnought is an ornately decorated war machine armed with an assault cannon and power fist. Interestingly, the Space Wolves' Venerable Dreadnought is similar in design to the standard Mark V Dreadnought, save for the Space Wolves badges and iconography and the unique Lightning Claw Heavy Flamer on the left side. The Space Wolves also possess standard shells for their Venerable Dreadnoughts. Forge World makes a resin Mark IV model. The style of the Mark IV is close to that of the epic scale Dreadnought when first released. It predates the current 25 mm scale design. Metal Mark V Dreadnoughts were released for Epic 40,000 and were carried over for the succeeding Epic, Armageddon game. There is some variation in the sarcophagi design, and the missile launcher consisted of 8 tubes instead of the cells of the Warhammer 40,000 scale. Weapons include the twinless cannon, assault cannon, and multi-melta for the right arm, and power fist, lightning claw, and missile launcher for the left side. Dreadnoughts had a unique blend of firepower and assault strength, making them useful for defending objectives. However, their slow speed otherwise proved a major hindrance on the vast epic battlefield, though the introduction of transports able to carry dreadnoughts, such as the Thunderhawk transporter, should compensate for this. The very earliest editions of Warhammer 40,000 had the dreadnoughts' occupants as healthy individuals, and they were common to both Imperial Guard and Space Marines forces. The first dreadnought models produced were for the Space Marines and Imperial Guard armies. These were the Furibundus, Derideo, and Contemptor patterns, which each had a different weapons configuration. There were a selection of arms, single or double bolter, lascannon or missile launcher, which fitted to the body, wide or narrow, which in turn could have either long or short legs. In Warhammer 40,000 2nd Edition, various bipedal, heavily armored fighting machines belonging to numerous factions of the game were collectively called dreadnoughts. Space Marines, Chaos Space Marines, Orks, and the Eldar all fielded a dreadnought of their own design, generally carrying at least one heavy weapon and having armor and survivability characteristics roughly equivalent to a tank. In fact, even under the current rules, dreadnoughts are so heavily armored they could be classified as medium armor rather than light armor, even when compared to vehicles such as the Chimera and Leman Russ tank. Dreadnoughts were important support units in the game due to their prowess in close combat, being far more capable of defending themselves at close quarters than tanks or other vehicles, while being much harder to damage than infantry. A corresponding disadvantage was their size as tabletop models. This made them highly visible, and particularly in the game's early days, where large tank models were less common. Dreadnoughts were highly vulnerable to being sighted from long distance and destroyed before they could retaliate. A cardboard cutout of an Ork dreadnought was included in the 2nd edition boxed introductory game as a stand-in for new players to be able to play all the included introductory scenarios, as the metal Ork dreadnought model was a fairly expensive purchase at the time of publication. In the 2nd edition, the 4 dreadnought patterns released by Games Workshop were metal models of the Mark V design, distinguished by their weaponry and chapter-specific banners and decals. They included an Ultramarines Dreadnought with an assault cannon and power fist Stormbolter, the Dark Angels Dreadnought with a twin-linked lascannon and missile launcher, now known as the Fire Support or Hellfire Dreadnought, the Blood Angels Dreadnought Furioso with a multi-melta and power fist Stormbolter, and the Space Wolves Bjorn, the fell-handed Venerable Dreadnought with an assault cannon and lightning claw heavy flamer. Bjorn the Fell-Handed is unique as he is fielded as a special character, and his Space Wolves tokens made him specific to that chapter. The model is still in release at the present, but has since been renamed the Space Wolves Venerable Dreadnought since the 3rd edition, and now lacks the banner. The other themed dreadnoughts can be used by other chapters. Following the release of Warhammer 40,000 3rd edition, Games Workshop publications generally ceased the generic use of the word dreadnought. instead referring only to the types of walkers fielded by the Space Marines, Chaos Space Marines, and occasionally the Orks by that name. Eldar Dreadnoughts were now known as Wraith Lords, and the Orks, except for the appropriate army list entries, colloquially referred to their versions simply as Deaf Dreads or Killikans, a name also given to smaller Orkish Dreadnought-style vehicles that they fielded. It was also in the 3rd edition that variant Dreadnoughts such as the Fire Support Hellfire, Mortis, and the Furioso were released.